It is not yet light, and it will not be light for hours. You wake in the year 950 to a cold that has teeth, in the black smoky dark of a longhouse in the far north, and before you have even opened your eyes you can hear something breathing in the dark a few feet from your head. Cattle, shifting their weight, chewing, warm. You are lying on a bench of packed earth and timber built against the wall, wrapped in wool and sharing a blanket with your own family, and above you the entire weight of the roof is turf, grass and soil laid over birch bark and rafters, holding in what little heat the night has left. Somewhere down the middle of that one long room, a low orange glow marks the hearth, the fire that is never ever allowed to go fully out. And here is the first thing you need to understand about yourself this morning. You are a farmer. You are not a raider. You are not a warrior with a sea-wet axe stepping off a dragon ship, and almost nothing you do today will look anything like the Viking of the films and the sagas. Yet this dark, cold room full of sleeping people and standing animals is the real Viking Age. This is where 9 out of every 10 of them actually lived and died. So get up. The daylight this far north is short and mean, and there is far more to do than the light will allow. Stay with this one ordinary day, from this black freezing morning to the firelit dark of the night, and by the end of it you will understand these people better than 100 battle scenes ever could. Let me set you down properly first. The year is around 950. The farm is yours, or rather it belongs to the man of the house, the Bondi, the free farmer who owns his own land and answers to no lord for it, and let us call him Ketil, a name so ordinary in the Norse world that you would meet a dozen of them at any gathering. Now, forget the word village, because you are almost certainly not in one. Most Norse people lived on a single farmstead, standing more or less alone in the landscape. One long timber hall for the family and the beasts, and scattered around it a handful of smaller buildings, a barn, a storehouse raised up on stone posts to keep the rats and the damp out, a smithy, a small bathhouse, a byre for the animals. Beyond the home field, the precious enclosed patch of the best soil. The land loosens into rough grazing, then bog, then forest. And this is the iron law of your whole life. Almost everything you will eat this year, wear this year, and burn this year, you and the people under this roof must grow, raise, make, or trade for with your own hands. There is no shop, there is no town around the corner to save you. There is only the farm, the turning seasons, and the work begins now in the dark. You rise, and the very first task belongs to the fire. In a world with no easy way to strike a flame, letting the hearth die is close to a disaster, so someone feeds it, coaxes the embers back, and the smoke climbs and gathers along the ridge of the roof and drifts out through a simple hole cut high in the gable. There is no chimney. The upper air of your home is a permanent grey haze, and everything you own smells faintly of wood smoke, always. By that fire the whole day is measured out. In fact, your day holds only 2 real meals, and the first comes an hour or so after rising. The Norse called it the dagmal, the day meal, and it might be no more than yesterday evening's stew warmed through, a piece of dense flatbread, a lump of cheese, washed down with ale. Because yes, the everyday drink here, for the grown and the half-grown alike, is a thin, sour, low-strength ale brewed at home. The water is not always to be trusted, and the ale is nearly as much food as it is drink. You will not eat again now until the light is gone. But before any of that, the animals. Push open the inner door and step into the other end of the same long building, and the warmth hits you first, and then the smell. This is the byre, and through the worst of the winter your cattle live here, indoors, under the same roof as you, separated by no more than a timber partition. It is not sentiment. It is survival, and it runs both ways. The beasts are sheltered from a cold that would kill them in the open, and their big bodies throw off a slow, steady heat that helps keep the humans alive at the far end of the hall. Your livestock are the true measure of your wealth, worth far more to you than any hoard of silver. Cattle above all, then sheep, then goats, then pigs. The pigs are the easy ones, half wild, turned out to root in the woods, breeding fast and asking little. The sheep and goats give wool and milk, and in the end, meat and skins. But it is the cattle you count first when you reckon what you are worth, and the richest farms could keep herds of many dozens, byres built to shelter 50, 80, even 100 head against the dark of the year. And now comes one of the great surprises about these people. one that quietly overturns the whole image of the meat-gorging Viking. What your animals are chiefly for, across most of the year, is not meat, it is milk. Milk is treasure here, and turning it into food that will last is one of the most important skills on the entire farm. Work that belongs above all to the woman of the house, the husfrija, the mistress, who often wears the keys of the household hanging at her belt as a plain badge of her authority over the stores, the dairy, and everything kept under lock. She and the other women milk the cows, the ewes, the she-goats, and then race against spoiling. Some of the milk is churned into butter, salted hard so it keeps for months. Some is pressed into cheese, and a great deal of it is soured and thickened into skye, a cool, tart, protein-rich curd. Something close to a very fresh cheese, so central to the northern table that people are still eating it, under the very same name, 1,000 years later. To let good milk go to waste in high summer, when the beasts are heavy with it, would be to invite hunger in the winter. Nothing here is thrown away, nothing. While one part of the household works the dairy, another turns to the grain. Your bread and your porridge come mostly from barley, the one grain tough enough to ripen this far north, helped out by oats and a little rye. The quern, the pair of heavy round stones you turn by hand to grind that grain into a coarse flour, is among the most worn and most used tools you own, and grinding is slow, endless, aching work. From that flour comes flatbread baked on a hot stone or an iron griddle at the edge of the fire, eaten the same day because with almost no rising it goes hard fast, and thick porridges that simmer in a soapstone or iron pot slung over the hearth, and the barley does one more thing besides. Malted and brewed, it becomes that everyday ale, so that the very same field that feeds you also fills the cup that sits beside every meal. By now the sun, such as it is, has finally hauled itself a little way above the hills, and the light work can begin, though on a black midwinter day this far north, you may have barely 6 hours of it before the dark closes back in. Everyone has their labour, and an enormous share of that labour is spent making cloth, because in your world, thread is not a pastime, it is one of the pillars the whole society stands on. It begins with the sheep, and it never truly ends. The wool is plucked or shorn, cleaned, combed, and then spun. And you can see women spinning almost anywhere and at almost any moment, walking, talking, watching the animals, a weighted spindle turning endlessly in the fingers, because so much yarn is needed that the work simply cannot stop. That thread is then woven on the great upright loom that leans against the wall of the hall, its vertical warp threads hanging down and held taut by rows of fired clay loom weights, the cloth built slowly downward from the top. Nobody here has ever knitted anything, because knitting has not yet been invented. Instead, your socks and mittens are made by a patient single-needle looping craft called nail binding. Slower than knitting, but far tougher, warm enough to matter when the cold is genuinely trying to kill you. And this women's work is no quiet domestic footnote. It clothes every soul on the farm, and beyond that it makes the one thing that carries the Vikings across the whole known world, the sail. A single large ship's sail could swallow the wool of roughly 2,000 sheep and many hundreds of hours of skilled labour to complete. No cloth, no sail, no voyages. The famous ships float on the unfamed work of women at the loom. Now step outside, into the cold, and look at what the men and the older children are doing, because the farm reaches far beyond the walls of the hall. In the short days there are fences to mend, firewood to split and haul, tools to keep sharp, animals on the near pasture to watch. And in one small shed the farm quietly performs something close to magic. It makes its own iron. You do not need a mine, you need a bog. Across the wetlands of the north, iron gathers naturally in the peat, and it can be dredged up as lumps of rusty bog ore. Then, in a tall clay furnace layered with charcoal and forced to a ferocious heat by a worker heaving on the bellows, that ore is coaxed into a glowing, spongy mass of raw iron called a bloom. Hammered and reworked, it becomes the nails, the knife blades, the sickles, the cauldrons and the rivets that hold your whole life together. A farm that can pull iron out of the very ground beneath it is a farm that can stand on its own 2 feet, and every scrap of that iron is precious, resharpened and reforged and mended for as long as it will possibly last. But there is a shadow lying across all of this steady industry, and honesty about the past is the whole reason this channel exists, so we are not going to look away from it. A great deal of the work you have been watching is not being done by free people at all. It is being done by slaves. The Norse called them thralls, and by some estimates as much as a fifth, even a quarter, of the people in this world were unfree, owned outright like the cattle, many of them seized in exactly the raids the sagas love to celebrate. The oldest, hardest, filthiest jobs on the farmland squarely on them. An old Norse poem describing the lot of the thrall has him building fences, spreading dung on the fields, cutting peat and minding the pigs from dark to dark. It is the thrall who is expected to wake first, light the fire and haul the water before anyone else so much as stirs. In law, a thrall was property, and to kill another man's thrall was not counted as murder but as damage, a matter of paying the owner for what you had destroyed. The tidy, self-sufficient farmstead you have been quietly admiring all morning is powered, in no small part, by people who never chose to be here at all. That is part of how they actually lived too, and it deserves to be said plainly. And so the short day burns down. The light fails early and fast. The animals are settled and fed from the great stores of hay that the whole farm broke its back to cut and dry and stack through the long days of summer, the single most important harvest of the entire year, because grass cut and cured in the warm months is quite simply the difference between livestock that survive to spring and livestock that starve in a barn. With the beasts secure, the household draws back in toward the one bright, warm point in all that darkness, the hearth. Now comes the second and final meal of the day, the dagmal, the night meal, the real one, taken late in the evening when the work is at last done. A pot of something long simmered, meat if the season and the year's luck allow, or fish, or barley, whatever there is, and bread and ale. Everyone gathered close in the flickering orange light while the wind leans on the turf roof overhead. And this is the hour the sagas almost never show you, and it may be the most Viking hour of them all. In a world with no books for most and no light to spare, the long dark evening belongs to voices. This is when the stories are told, and told again, by the fire, the old feuds and the far voyages and the gods and the ancestors, carried in living memory from mouth to mouth to mouth. It is here, in the smoke and the firelight of 10,000 ordinary farms exactly like this one, that the whole vast storehouse of Norse legend was actually kept alive. The people we remember as men of the sword were, on very nearly every night of their lives, men and women of the hearth. So let this be the twist that reorders everything you thought you knew. The raider was the exception, the farmer was the rule. For every Norseman who ever swung an axe on a foreign beach, there were 9 who never left the valley they were born in, who spent their whole lives sowing barley and milking cows and cutting hay and mending fences against the dark. The Viking Age was not, at its heart, an age of raids. It was an age of farms. The dragon ships could only sail because someone stayed home to grow the grain, raise the beasts, spin the wool for the sail, and forge the iron for the axe. The entire glittering, violent legend floats on top of a vast, silent ocean of ordinary muddy work, and the work is the truer story, and that in the end is what should stay with you, not the horned helmet, which no Viking ever wore, invented for an opera stage 8 centuries after the last of them died, not the axe, the turf roof, the fire that is never let out, the cattle breathing in the winter dark a few feet from where the children sleep. 1,000 years on, the raids are long over and the kingdoms they terrified are dust, but the barley still ripens in those same short northern summers. The sheep still graze those same grey hills, and Skye is still on the table. The real monument the Vikings left behind was never a battlefield. It was a farm lit by one small fire against an enormous darkness, and kept, day after ordinary day, by people who are far more like you than the legends will ever admit. So tell us in the comments below, what surprised you most? The cattle living right inside the house, the women whose looms made the ships possible, or the simple fact that the real Viking was almost always a farmer, because the people who actually lived it are almost never the people the stories choose to remember.